Solar 3.0 is finally here, and with it we got a ton of new abilities. We have new aspects and fragments, new Solar 3.0 mechanics to learn, new seasonal mods to pair with it, and a bunch of reworks to existing solar-themed exotics to work alongside the new Solar 3.0 subclass system. It's a lot to chew on at one time, but I've got you covered. We're going to take a look at a Warlock build I put together today for you guys that takes advantage of a ton of the new Solar 3.0 mechanics and mods, and I'm hoping to also help you learn how these new mechanics work so that you can edit and tinker with your own builds as you adjust things to your own playstyle. Solar 3.0 has a ton of freedom when it comes to build crafting. You can really lean into certain mechanics depending on the weapons and mods that you enjoy using. We're going to touch on that a little bit more in a bit. Let's talk about one of the fundamental new mechanics of Solar 3.0, Scorch. Scorch is essentially the new word for burn. It's a new mechanic in the sense that you can build Scorch stacks on any given target. Once you hit 100 stacks of Scorch, the target will ignite, causing a large solar explosion. Almost all of our solar grenades, some of our solar melees, and even some of our solar exotic weapons will build stacks of Scorch on targets. Some classes are better at this than others, but the build we're using today is going to be all about stacking Scorch as quickly as possible on everything around us and igniting those targets for big AoE burst damage. Taking a look at the subclass, starting off with the super, we're going to want to run Well of Radiance. The Daybreak super no longer causes burns or scorches the enemy target unless you're using the Dawn Chorus exotic helmet. Now we have a much stronger exotic pairing for our armor we're using with this build, so we're actually going to want to use the Well of Radiance. This also now applies stacks of Scorch when you drop the well. If there are enemies inside of that area where you drop the well down, it will apply some stacks of Scorch to anything that's inside of there. So that will help us with building up some of those stacks. Moving on to our class ability, we have the new class ability Phoenix Dive. This was moved from an air ability to a class ability now with Solar 3.0, and it has a couple changes with it. When you use your class ability in the air now, you will dive to the ground and create a burst of solar light that will cure nearby allies. When you have Heat Rising active, you gain restoration while diving, and you scorch enemy targets upon landing. With this build, we're pretty much always going to have Heat Rising active, so we can take advantage of this to dive down, get a free heal, and apply Scorch to anything around us when we land. It's a really unique and fun new ability to use, and I wanted to incorporate it into the build. I prefer Burst Glide. Use whatever movement you prefer here. For our melee ability, we're going to be using the new Warlock ability, Incinerator Snap. This is new with Solar 3.0, and it's really awesome. You snap your fingers in front of you, it sort of shoots out a fan of sparks, and anything that it hits, it's going to stack Scorch on all of those targets. It's a really nice AoE ability and allows you to stack up Scorch very easily on enemy targets, and it's going to play into our exotic armor of choice perfectly for this build. The grenade of choice will be the Solar Grenade. This is slightly different now. Anything that's trapped inside will also build stacks of Scorch. I'm sure you can see that theme here. Every one of our abilities is going to allow us to stack Scorch on our enemies. Now we can take that even further with this new aspect, Touch of Flame. This improves our solar grenades. Your healing, solar, firebolt, and fusion grenades have enhanced functionality. We are using the solar grenade. You can see right here, this increases the linger duration of the grenade, and it periodically emits blobs of lava around its perimeter. So it actually gives it a slightly bigger AoE, some more bursty damage. It'll hit some targets around it. It's a really fun and really unique way to enhance those solar grenades. We're going to pair that with the other Heat Rises aspect. This is just like it was back on Top Tree Dawnblade. You can consume your grenade to activate Heat Rises. That'll give you 10 seconds of the buff, and while flying in the air getting kills, you can extend the duration of that buff up to 30 seconds. This gives you greatly increased air effectiveness on all of your weapons, and while you're airborne, any kill that you get is going to give you a big chunk of melee energy back. That's very important to note with the build here, to always keep that in mind, that while you're airborne and you get kills, it's going to give you your melee back very quickly. Moving on to the fragments here, it's all going to pair back into that Scorch setup. First and foremost, we're taking Ember of Ashes. You apply more Scorch stacks to targets. So everything that we do will apply more Scorch stacks than normal by using this fragment. And then we will also use Ember of Singeing, where your class ability recharges faster when you scorch targets. Now remember, we're using Phoenix Dive, so while we're scorching targets from our melee, grenade, or Phoenix Dive itself, that's going to be giving us Phoenix Dive back even quicker, so we have that more often. We're going to be using Ember of Eruption, where your solar ignitions have increased area of effect. Remember, when we hit 100 stacks of Scorch, the target will explode in a solar ignition. This will give it a larger AoE, also gives us plus 10 strength. And finally, we will use Ember of Searing, where defeating Scorch targets grants melee energy. So we have this working for us as well to give us our melee back as often as possible. Between Heat Rises and Ember of Searing, we have almost permanent uptime on our solar melee, which is great because we're going to talk about the exotic armor that we're pairing with this. Now we're going to be using the tried and true classic solar warlock exotic, the Sunbracers. These are even more powerful now with Solar 3.0. This increases the duration of solar grenades, which stacks with the aspect we are using to improve them already. And our solar melee kills will grant unlimited solar grenade energy for a brief time. So when we use our incinerator snap and we kill an enemy target, we will get an unlimited solar grenade cast. You can throw out 5 solar grenades back to back as quickly as possible when you have this buff. Now, all of those are going to be scorching targets. They're going to have that increased lava AoE. You can just be lighting up the entire battlefield, chucking out solar grenades left and right. It's so much fun with Solar 3.0. Now, we will be pairing this with the Prometheus Lens exotic trace rifle. This trace rifle actually got a rework with Solar 3.0 because this now applies Scorch to enemy targets. When you sustain that beam on the enemy target, it will start to build Scorch on that enemy. So not only do all of our abilities apply stacks of Scorch, but now our main weapon will also do so as well with the Prometheus Lens. This works perfectly this season because on the artifact, we have Overload trace rifles this season, meaning we can stun Overload champions with our Prometheus Lens, and there are a ton of other trace rifle mods as well. We have Trace Rifle Ammo Finder and Trace Rifle Reserves are also on the artifact as well, so you can really have a full Trace Rifle loadout this season and take advantage of something like Prometheus Lens. So that's the exotics and the subclass. Let's talk about the mods that we're going to pair with this to really flush out the build. We're going to turn this into an elemental well build, and it's actually very easy to get it set up and rolling. The first mod that we're going to be using is Elemental Armaments. Combatant weapon final blows with the damage that match our subclass has a chance to spawn elemental wells. So our Prometheus Lens, the weapon kills from that have a chance to spawn a solar elemental well. And we'll also be using Elemental Ordnance, which makes it so our solar grenade kills will also create a solar elemental well. That pairs perfectly with Sunbracers. We're going to be throwing grenades everywhere constantly, so we'll always be creating these solar elemental wells either from Prometheus Lens or from our grenades on Sunbracer. We will pair that with Font of Might. This is going to give us increased solar weapon damage when we pick up those elemental wells. It's going to make Prometheus Lens do even more damage. If you're also using a solar heavy weapon, it will increase the damage of that as well. To flush things out and make it more consistent, we will also use Bountiful Wells. This makes it so elemental well mods that cause you to spawn wells will now stack. This acts like sort of a ditto, so we basically have 2 copies of Elemental Armaments and Elemental Ordnance. So every time we create a well, a second well will also be generated to give us increased ability regen, because all of these wells also give us back our abilities when we pick them up. The final mod here for the elemental well setup will be Well of Ordnance. Picking up a solar elemental well grants you additional grenade energy. This is just a nice cherry on top. Gives us back our grenade if we're ever caught out in a situation where we don't have our melee or we don't get that Sunbracer proc going. This is a way of us getting our grenade back to get things like Heat Rising rolling again. Now you can see here on our class item, we're actually going to take a look at some of the artifact mods we're using. The first one we're using is Solar Fulmination. Now this is in the final column of the seasonal artifact. This makes it so your ignitions do increased damage in an increased radius. So when we get 100 stacks of Scorch, that explosion is going to do even more damage, and it's going to be a larger radius. Very cheap 3-cost mod to throw on here. I'm also using Molten Overload, which makes it so our solar grenades are also overload grenades, giving us more anti-champion capabilities. There are a ton of other solar 3.0 mods that you can use from the seasonal artifact this season. We have things like Rays of Precision, where solar precision final blows will cause combatants to ignite when we are radiant. We have a ton of other mods here that you can mix and match to see what matches your playstyle best. But for now, playing into that ignition, building up those stacks of Scorch to get that big explosion works really well with solar fulmination. Beyond that, we are trying to get as close to 100 discipline and 100 recovery as possible. Now keep in mind, you're always going to want to consume your grenade and proc Heat Rising before worrying about Sunbracers. Before using your melee to proc that Sunbracers buff, always get Heat Rising rolling and be floating in the air so you can always get your melee back very quickly and constantly have ways of applying Scorch to the enemy target. Now, I always like to provide a list of all of the mods that I use in the build, so you have a quick reference here. Feel free to go ahead and pause the video. I'll have everything listed here on the screen so you can copy this over to your build. There will also be a dim loadout link down in the description of the video. You can copy and paste that over to Destiny Item Manager, and it will do its best to copy my exact build with your gear and armor on your Guardian. It's a really easy way to get this build set up for yourself. This is a very fundamental level build for Solar 3.0. There's a lot of new exotic combinations. Things like Jotun has a catalyst that causes Scorch. There's a lot of unique solar weapons that we can have some fun interactions with. So let me know what you're experimenting with. This is just sort of the baseline Solar 3.0 build that I'm using right now. It's very strong, really great for things like the Castellum, the Leviathan, clearing out that seasonal content and checking out some of the fun things that we can do with this new system. If you guys enjoyed the video, do me a favor, leave a like down below and smash that subscribe button. Tons of more Solar 3.0 builds coming for Hunters and Titans as well, so you don't want to miss out on those. Thank you guys for hanging out, and I will catch you in the next one.